Welcome to the Miqra. Welcome to the Miqra. Shabbat Shalom. We have refreshments over there. Feel free if you get thirsty to grab a water over there, or a coffee or tea over there. And there's other types of refreshment in the back if you need to avail yourself of that as well. Hallelujah. Today our teaching, if I can get it up on the board here, is entitled Under the Shadow of His Wings. We've done some heavy-duty scripture teaching and challenging of the saints in the last few weeks, and today we're going to take a look at what the Father provides for His people as a means of protection, as a means of being our Elohim, a provider, the one who watches over us. We read in one of the Psalms, He never slumbers and He never sleeps, but He watches over His people Israel. And so today we're going to look at what it means to abide under the shadow of His wings. And so the study in Psalm chapter 91, of course, must begin with a reading of Psalm 91. So let me read Psalm 91 out of a familiar version to me. This is kind of an amalgamation of the New International Version, the New American Standard Version, and my own little inputs where I like to clarify a word, and so I might change the translation slightly. And so this is my own translation, really based upon more common translations. It says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of Yahweh, He is my refuge and my fortress, my Elohim in whom I trust." Verses 3 through 6, "Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you shall find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. If you make the Most High your dwelling, even Yahweh, who is my refuge, then no harm will befall you. No disaster will come near your tent. For He will command His angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. You will tread upon the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent." And finishing up verses 14 through 16, "Because He loves me, says Yahweh, I will rescue Him. I will protect Him, for He acknowledges my name. He will call upon me, and I will answer Him. I will be with Him in trouble. I will deliver Him and honor Him. With long life will I satisfy Him and show Him my salvation." So these are the promises of the Father in Psalm 91, that He's going to be our Elohim, and that we can wholly depend upon Him and come to expect His protection and His loving kindness to be shed abroad upon us. And the promises are very clear. The promises of His willingness to watch over us and guard us from all harm are stated in several different ways. And so let's begin with the question, who wrote Psalm 91? There are basically two views about who wrote Psalm 91. It could have been Moshe or David. There are probably others that may postulate another author. But these are the two main individuals who it is thought wrote Psalm 91. And the reason for Moshe is because Psalm 90 begins in this fashion. Verse 1, Psalm 90 says, "A prayer of Moshe, the man of Elohim, Yahweh, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations." And so that theme of dwelling place is repeated and elaborated upon in Psalm 91. And so some people thought, well, this follows immediately after Psalm 90, which is clearly written by Moshe, and so probably Moshe wrote Psalm 91. The other thought is that David wrote this psalm, and that is because some additional themes, shadow, shelter, protection, these are themes often used by David in the psalms that he wrote. And so there's some very similar passages, and we're going to look at some of those other psalms that David wrote and compare them to what Psalm 91 describes. And we're going to look at the protection and the sheltering, the wings, that figure of speech of the hen covering her chicks with her wings as a means of protecting her little ones. So does it really matter who wrote Psalm 91? Probably at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which individual wrote the psalm, because it's a reflection of the spirit, the revelation of the spirit of Elohim to us and how Yahweh wants to protect his people. So whether it's Moshe or David, the message is still the same, and the message is still powerful. And so let's break into Psalm 91 and look at. We're going to do a few word studies, and we're going to look at some other psalms that relate to what was written here, either by Moshe or David. So beginning in verse 1, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." The word shelter here, the word shelter in this verse is the Hebrew word seter. It can mean hiding place. Yeah. Hiding place, shelter. And there are other psalms that I think are translated with this English translation, hiding place. "You are my hiding place" is a wonderful psalm with those words in it. Shelter, secret place. It can mean to conceal or to protect. And so the shelter is a protection. It's the shelter of the Most High is a reference to the protection of the Almighty. And so Psalm 17:8 kind of brings that out a little bit. It says in this psalm, which I believe, well, it was written by David, "Keep me as the apple of your eye, hide me in the shadow of your wings." And so here the idea of concealment or protection is translated with the word hide, or hide me in the shadow of your wings. This was David's goal, as we're going to see in a couple of other of the psalms that he wrote, is the goal of David was to be sheltered in the shadow of the Most High. Pass the night. This word, "he who dwells," is not the regular, more common word for to dwell or to live in the shelter, but it's a particular word. It's this Hebrew word lun, and it means literally to lodge or to pass the night, to rest or dwell or abide, or some of the translations of this word. The picture here of this Hebrew word is of a lodging and a place of protection through whatever the night may bring. And this theme of what comes through the night is brought forward as we continue to read in Psalm 91, protecting us from the pestilence. A day in the what was it? I forget. Let me go back. The terror of night. The terror of night. The arrow that flies by day. The pestilence that stalks in the darkness. So you have terror and pestilence that come at night. And this word loon is a picture of the protection that we have from the terror and the pestilence when we fall under Yahweh's protection. Lot protected his visitors inside his home through the night. And the same Hebrew word is used here, or the same concept is being illustrated. When he brought the visitors in who had come into the city, and it was becoming nightfall, he knew what the men of that city were capable of. And so he invited those visitors in a common act of hospitality to come into his dwelling place at night. And it was up to Lot, as the head of that home, to protect the visitors that came under the shadow of his protection in his home. Genesis 19:8 reads this way, "Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man, and let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them." And I don't really have a good explanation for why Lot was saying this. It seems inconceivable that he would give his daughters to these men who were wicked, to do to them whatever they desired. But it shows the seriousness with which Lot took this responsibility of protecting his visitors. The contrast here is, maybe we shouldn't see it as he was giving away his daughters, because he didn't actually do that. In the text, he didn't actually send out his daughters to these men. But he was willing to go to great lengths to protect his visitors. And this is what the Hebrew word loon here means in Psalm 91. And the text continues in Genesis 19:8, "But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." And so it is, again, the responsibility of the one who provides the protection to see to it that those who come under his wings, under his protection, are guarded from all harm. Psalm 31 goes on to speak about the sheltering of the Almighty under the shadow of his wings. And this speaks of the shelter from the intrigues of men. An example of which is what we just read in Genesis. "How great is your goodness," David writes, "which you have stored up for those who fear you, which you bestow in the sight of men on those who take refuge in you. In the shelter of your presence, you hide them from the intrigues of men. In your dwelling, you keep them safe from accusing tongues." And so we often pray that the Father protect us from the evil one. Do not lead us into temptation, is the prayer in the Lord's Prayer, is that section where the Master gives us an example prayer as to how to pray. Don't let the evil one overcome us with his temptations, is basically the idea there. In the shelter of the Father's protection, we don't have to worry about the enemy. We are protected and hidden from the attacks of the enemy, and we can take solace in the fact that Father wants to provide that intimate protection for his people. Psalm 32 is another psalm that David wrote that speaks of these things. David writes in verses 6 through 8, "Therefore let everyone who is godly pray to you while you may be found. Surely when the mighty waters rise, they will not reach him." And this is alluded to as well in Psalm 91, where the protection is from all that's going on around us, all the chaos and confusion, the pestilence, the terror, the fear that happens around us. "You are my hiding place." This is one of those verses that I alluded to earlier, where David translates the word hiding place. "You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. Selah. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you and watch over you. It reminds me of surrounding me with songs of deliverance. It reminds me of the Red Sea crossing, when the Father protected our ancestors from the armies of Pharaoh who were coming at them, and they had nowhere to go. So the Father opened up the sea, and the Israelites walked through the sea on dry land to the other side. And when Pharaoh's army entered in to walk across that land bridge as well, they were covered. The waters came back down, and they drowned the entire army of Pharaoh. But then the response of our ancestors was to sing a song of praise to Yahweh, and Miriam led that song in praise. So you surround me with songs of deliverance. It was a song, a praising for the deliverance of Yahweh. So anyway, the hiding place. You'll protect me from trouble, surround me with songs of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you and counsel you and watch over you. These are the promises of the Father for those who come under the shadow of his wings. Praying in a secret place. The Master brought out an interesting insight about praying in a secret place. When we talk about going into the secret place in the shelter of the Almighty, we want to probably come to some understanding about what is the secret place and what is the shelter of the Almighty, and we're kind of working into an understanding of that. But the Master Yahusha talked about praying. He said, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. And so it seems that the Pharisees, these hypocrites, were not in touch with the Almighty and meeting with him in a secret place. They had, because they didn't have that kind of relationship with the Almighty, their prayers had to be out in public, out in the open, so people thought that they had that relationship with the Almighty. So their prayers were open for everyone to see, so everyone would praise them and think that they had, a great relationship, and yet they didn't. And so the Master's instruction to his disciples was different. He said, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. And then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And so I believe this is part of coming under the shadow of the Almighty. It's communicating with the Father, not to be seen by men, but in an intimate way where we're meeting with him and him alone. We have our quiet time with him, and our focus is on him and not to be seen by men. And this can only be accomplished because we have to check our motives when we pray, when we come before the Father. Why are we doing this? Are we doing this for show, or are we doing this because we really seek out the face and an audience with the Almighty, to be, in his presence and to seek his desire and his will for our lives? So we're supposed to be doing these things in secret, entering into that secret place, a place of privacy where it's us alone with Elohim. Psalm 91 verse 2 says, I will say of Yahweh, he is my refuge and my fortress, my Elohim, in whom I trust. In Psalm 27, David alluded to these things, where again, David writes, Yahweh is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Yahweh is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? By putting his trust in Yahweh, he didn't have to be afraid of the enemy, the advances of pestilence and the armies, the enemy armies who would come up to him in the thousands and tens of thousands. When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, when my enemies and my foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then will I be confident. So David had this confidence because of his relationship with Yahweh, that no matter what is brought against him, whether it's the Satan himself or it's an army that Satan's leading, the enemies that want to kill him, he had complete confidence that Yahweh was going to protect him in all of those things that could be brought against him. And then he continues in Psalm 27, he says, one thing I ask of Yahweh, this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of Yahweh all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of Yahweh and to seek him in his temple. So for David, dwelling in the house of Yahweh, in other words, going up to that dwelling place, that tent of meeting, and praying to Yahweh and being close to his presence was the most precious thing in his life. He wanted to seek Yahweh, and so this was kind of a reflection of the heart of David, that he desired to be close to the Father and to seek him. For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his tabernacle and set me high upon a rock. So it was in the place of Yahweh's dwelling, and when David went out to meet him there, that David found protection and safety and hiddenness from the troubles of the world. Psalm 27. Back to Psalm 91, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I want to take a look at this word shadow, because we've looked at the word shelter and we've looked at the word dwell, or to abide, to spend the night at. Let's take a look at the Hebrew word for shadow. It's pronounced sel. It means shade or covering or protection. It's really similar in some ways to the word shelter. A different word though, and it has a little different connotation. And again, Genesis 19:8 reflects this, because the word protection, when they come under the protection of my roof, this is the word shadow. It's the Hebrew word sel here in Genesis 19:8. So again, Lot was providing this shadow or shelter for his visitors. And this is the idea of a shade or a shadow. It's a protection. Surely, back to Psalm 91, surely he will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. And so I want to break this down a little bit. We're going to return, because there's a couple more things that need to be said about shadow. I wanted to introduce the Hebrew word and then move on and see what Psalm 91 says about this shadow. But first let's start with the fowler's snare. It says he will save you from the fowler's snare. In Psalm 31, David alludes to the traps that are set for him. The fowler is a bird catcher. I don't know if you know that word, fowler. It's the one who catches birds, typically with a net. So David writes in Psalm 31, for the director of music, a psalm of David, in you, Yahweh, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Deliver me in your righteousness. Turn your ear to me. Come quickly to my rescue. Be my rock of your refuge, a strong fortress to save me. So he uses all these metaphors, the shadow, delivering, rescue, rock of refuge, strong fortress. All of these, again, point to the concept of the protection of the Almighty. Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead and guide me. Free me from the trap that is set for me. That's the fowler's snare. For you are my refuge. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Redeem me, Yahweh, the Elohim of truth. And so the fowler's snare, or the net that is cast, is another one of those figures of speech that is used a few times to speak of the enemy trying to capture him and try to trap him. Both the Satan himself, but also his enemies, the armies of the other nations around, who would try to ensnare him, to trap him, and to corner him as he was running. Often he would run through the mountains, where he was familiar with the territory there, and so he knew the safe passages through the mountains. But his enemies would try to trap him into a corner so that they can capture him and kill him. And so David's prayer was always to the Father, set me free from the trap that my enemies have set for me. Psalm 37:6 refers to the refuge and the shadow. He will cover you with his wings, he will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Psalm 36 says, how priceless is your unfailing love, both high and low among men. Find refuge in the shadow of your wings. The shadow of your wings. And again in Psalm 57, he refers to the shadow of your wings. For the director of music to the tune of Do Not Destroy of David, a Miqra, when he had fled from Shaul into the cave. And this is another example of how his enemy tried to trap him, and so that he could corner him and capture him. And so Saul was after him, and David fled into this cave. And David said, have mercy on me, O Elohim, have mercy on me. For in you my soul takes refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to Elohim Most High, to Elohim, who fulfills his purpose for me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. Selah. Elohim sends his love and his faithfulness. So we know that Shaul never really caught David. And in fact, David is the one who had an opportunity to kill Shaul in one of the caves that Saul was sleeping in for the night. But he didn't do that because he recognized the important principle of do not touch my anointed. And Saul was the anointed king of Israel. And so David, even though he had opportunity to kill his enemy, let Saul live. The Master explains this metaphor of under his wings. In Matthew 23, verse 37, as Yahusha is lamenting over Jerusalem, he makes this statement, O Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you are not willing. Messiah chose the common chicken for his metaphor because of the hen's selfless devotion to its chicks. One commentator explained that a chicken is almost defenseless, and yet it will never abandon its offspring when danger arises. How much more the Almighty, who is very much a defender of the fatherless and the widow and of his people, will defend his people and not allow the enemy to be able to attack his sons and daughters. This commentator also says it also is an active mother and will gather its offspring together to protect them. This is what the hen does when it sees danger arising. It will call out to its chicks and it will gather them together and cover them over with its wings. If necessary, it will shield its little chicks with its own body, offering itself to preserve their lives. So I have a little picture of a hen with the baby under its wing. To the hen, its chicks are valued greatly. It actively will call to them. Perhaps the most important point about the chicks in this metaphor is what is assumed. These chickens obey instinct. They come to their mother. This means that when the hen calls, they come without hesitation, without delay, and without question. They will run to the safety that is only found underneath their mother's wings. And so this is the picture that the Messiah is given. This is really the picture of Psalm 91 coming under the shadow of his wings, is that when he calls to us, when he warns us of danger, we're to run to him for protection. And we find that protection by being sheltered in the privacy of intimate fellowship and relationship with him, in trusting in him, just as the chick instinctively trusts its mother to provide protection. So that's a part of the word picture here, is that we're to run to him when he sends out the warning call that the enemy is about to attack, or that the enemy is doing a work and is trying to bring his people down. We hide in the shelter of his wings. Psalm 91:6, you will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. The plagues here kind of reminded me of the plagues of Deuteronomy chapter 28. In Deuteronomy 28, we're given a list of the blessings that the Father will bestow upon his people who are obedient to his covenant commandments. And they include pretty much every area of our life, that he will guard us and protect us. He will provide shelter. He will provide food, rain in its season. Our wives will deliver healthy children, and our life will be blessed in every possible way. But he was talking to his people, and he said, but if you do not obey me, and you refuse to obey my covenant commandments, then I will bring these plagues upon you. And included among that long list of plagues are fear and the arrow that flies by night, in other words, the attacks of the enemy, the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, and the plague that destroys at midday. And so all of those things are allowed. The Almighty basically gives over his people to the attacks of the enemy, and no longer shelters them when they're not in obedience with him. An important theme then of Psalm 91 is to obey the Almighty. And again, this is part of this whole picture of being under his shadow. It's, the protection of Yahweh is provided not only in miraculous ways, in the way that the Father on a spiritual level can fight our battles for us, but the protection of Yahweh is also seen in the commandments that he's given to us. And, in one of the words that we looked at when we were studying the terminology of the Torah was a word that means boundary or guardian. These are words that are used to describe the very commandments that he's given us. And so the instructions are given for our protection. When we abide under the protection of his commandments by doing in obedience those commandments, then the protection is there for us. We don't fall into the problems of disobedience, the problems of the consequence of disobedience. And so we're literally protected, not only by the Spirit of the Almighty, but by obedience to his word.
Amen.
Hallelujah. So, Paul says to Timothy in regards to this fear, he says, Elohim has not given us the spirit of fear. Fear comes from the enemy. Fear comes from falling into that place where we're not trusting in the Father. We've fallen out of favor with Him because of disobedience. And so Yahweh lifts His protection from us in some manner. Sometimes a little bit, sometimes if we continue in our rebellion, He completely removes all protection from us, and we're just left to the devices of the enemy. And that's where the fear comes in, because we see now the enemy at work in our lives, and we recognize that we are susceptible to the things that the enemy will bring at us. And so there's fear when we don't have the confidence of Yahweh watching over us because we've fallen out of fellowship with Him. So it's not Elohim that's given us a spirit of fear, but it's through disobedience. That's where this fear springs up within us, because we've fallen out of the protection. But this is what Elohim has given us. He's given us power and of love and of a sound mind. He's given us the spirit that sustains us, the power that we need to be able to walk in confidence before Him, and of that love and sound mind. The sound mind being, we know what the Father desires of us, and we walk in it. Whereas, okay. My battery's running low. Maybe I need to turn the power on. Hallelujah. So those things come from the Father. The sound mind comes from the Father. And that's what we desire. Isaiah 54 is another passage of Scripture that brings out the terrors that come upon us at night. I'm all set. You're good. Is it still recording? Mm-hmm. All right. Isaiah 54, verses 13 through 15. All your sons will be taught by Yahweh, and great will be your children's peace. This is talking about the time when we enter back into the land to live in the Father's presence. Because there's an important verse here, and verse 15 is one that, I'll get to it. Never mind. I'm getting ahead of myself. So in righteousness you will be established. Tyranny will be far from you. You will have nothing to fear. Terror will be far removed. It will not come near you. This is when we're living in the Father's presence in the kingdom. If anyone does attack you, it will not be my doing. Whoever attacks you will surrender to you. And then in the verses that follow, Isaiah continues, see, it is I who created the blacksmith, who fans the coals into flame and forges a weapon fit for its work. And it is I who have created the destroyer to work havoc. We mentioned those plagues, the curses that are mentioned in Deuteronomy 28 that fall upon those who are walking in disobedience and rebellion. And so it's the Father who created the destroyer, and the Father basically unleashes the destroyer, the enemy, the devil, to work havoc in our lives, to bring about the curses and the pestilences and the fear and all of those things. And he says, no weapon, he's speaking of the future time, or that time when we're in his dwelling place. And this is where it applies to Psalm 91, because we're supposed to seek out that place of protection, that dwelling place of the Almighty. No weapon formed against you will prevail or prosper. And so here's a verse that we quote all the time. And it's right that we quote this verse, but it's about the destroyer and how Father will protect us from the destroyer who is looking to wreak havoc. What does the Master say about the devil? He is trying to kill and to destroy. What's the first one?
Steal.
To steal and to kill and to destroy. Those are the works of the enemy. But no weapon formed against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. This is the heritage of the servants of Yahweh, and this is their vindication from me, declares Yahweh. So Yahweh provides that protection like a chick being provided for under the wing of its mother. The heritage or the inheritance of Yahweh's people is to get this kind of vindication, that we have a refutation. We have the word given to us to refute the enemy who accuses us, and to beat back the advances of the enemy who wants to forge his weapons against us. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. This reminded me of the plagues in Egypt, especially the death of the firstborn, where there were literally thousands, especially the firstborn, there were thousands of people, thousands of homes nearby where there were screams heard. The firstborn of the sons of Egypt were dying, and of all of those who did not put the blood on the doorposts. And the Israelites were told to just sit back and stay in their homes and see the punishment of the wicked. They were hearing the cries of the wicked who did not trust in Yahweh. They were just observing with their eyes. They didn't have to do anything else. They entered into their homes, put the blood on the doorposts, and Father did the work after that. And so they saw the punishment of the wicked. So Deuteronomy 32 brings out this point. How could one man chase 1,000? Or two put 10,000 to flight? Unless their rock had sold them. Unless Yahweh had given them up. And so the implication here is that it's the rock, Yahweh, who enables us as obedient sons and daughters to be able to chase 1,000. One of us can chase 1,000 enemies away. And I'm talking about, he was talking about the enemies on the battlefield, but it's an allusion to the spiritual warfare that's going on, that any one of us, when we place our trust in Yahweh, can chase away 1,000 of the enemy. When the enemy, when the demons, when the unclean spirits want to come into our presence and want to wreak havoc, they want to cause their disruption and get into our face, we have the authority to chase 1,000 away because Yahweh is our rock. He is our authority. He's given us that authority. And so I would say that this verse applies. The verses that speak of the Israelites chasing away 1,000 and two chasing away 10,000 applies to his people today. Because their rock is not like our rock, even as our enemies concede. The enemies know who our rock is. And they have to concede and yield to the authority that we wield in their presence. And wielding is one of those words that speak of how you swing a sword. But we wield authority. The sword is a representation of authority, and we wield his authority through the work of our Master Messiah and the authority that is given to us. So we can chase 1,000 away, each one of us. I want you to be aware of that if you weren't already. 1,000, can you imagine that? We think of if we can just rebuke one unclean spirit, or maybe even a couple. We saw that example of Legion, who was a legion or a great many demons residing in that demoniac. And so Yahusha was able to cast out the legion of demons out of that man. And we too can chase a legion of demons away when we're walking and being sheltered in the shadow of the Almighty. There are a couple other things that we need to look at in terms of shadow pictures because the shadow of the Almighty also alludes to the shadow pictures. In Hebrews 8:5, we're told that they, the Levitical priesthood, more specifically the Aaronic priesthood, they serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. And this is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle, see it to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. And so the sanctuary that was on earth, where the Father was dwelling by his Spirit, was only a copy and shadow of the real sanctuary that is in heaven. So what is the shadow of the Almighty? I am suggesting to you that it is the very presence of Yahweh. When David desired to dwell in his sanctuary, the sanctuary of the Almighty, and to live in his tents, he was alluding to this fact of the presence of Yahweh is in the shadow of that shelter, of that tent that was erected, so that his presence could be there in that place among his people. The sanctuary is a shadow of the Almighty. And so when we seek out to abide in his presence, then that's what it means to be in the shadow of the Almighty. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, Hebrews 10:1 tells us. Again, the word shadow is referring to the sacrifices and offerings, or more specifically, into the presence of Yahweh, into the tabernacle where these sacrifices and offerings were brought to make atonement for the sins of his people. But the law concerning sacrifices and offerings, and the clarification of what Paul means by law here is seen in the rest of the verse here. It says the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices, repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. So the law is concerning the sacrifice, the system of sacrifice that was done by the Aaronic priests in the sanctuary. But again, those were only a shadow of the good things to come. And so the shadow is the presence of Yahweh and how we enter into the presence of Yahweh. Psalm 91, verse 9, when you make the Most High your dwelling. And we're getting kind of into a summary of what this psalm is teaching. I find that the translation, if you make the most high your dwelling, it's inadequate because there is a Hebrew word for if. And we've done that word study a while back when we were looking at Psalm 95. If you hear his voice, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And if they will, how did that psalm end? It talked about the Sabbath and entering into his rest. If you will enter my rest. The word if there is the Hebrew word im, but this is the Hebrew word ki. And the Hebrew word ki is better translated when, not if. So what I'm suggesting is not if you make the Most High your dwelling, but when you make the Most High your dwelling. This is the qualification, or the wow. This is how we can avail ourselves of this protection. It's when we make the Most High our dwelling. So even Yahweh, who is my refuge, then no harm will befall you. So it's when you do this, then here's the consequence or the result of it. When you make the Most High your dwelling, then no harm will befall you. No disaster will come near your tent. There is a way that we can have a shallow relationship with the Almighty. We ask, when we come into an understanding of what the Messiah did for us, then we ask the Messiah to come into our heart, into our life, and we yield ourselves to him. There is a measure of coming into his presence there, but we haven't fully entered in until we make the Most High our dwelling. In other words, there's things that need to be worked out through sanctification, through the process of setting ourselves apart to make ourselves pleasing to the Almighty. And so when we come into a more intimate fellowship and relationship with the Almighty, then no harm will befall you. Because we might ask ourselves, why do Christians fall into harm's way? Why does evil come to Christians? And that's a real common, there have been books written about why Christians endure evil and why bad things come to Christians. And the answer to that is that Yahweh's promises to those who make the Most High their dwelling. And this isn't just a surface relationship with the Almighty, where, we still have open sin in our lives and we haven't overcome in some areas of our life, and there's still rampant transgression issues in our lives. The Most High doesn't promise to protect us from all evil when there's still these open sin issues in our life. But it's when we make the Most High our dwelling and we come completely like the chicks are completely dependent and trusting in their mother to come under the shelter of her wings. When we come under the shelter of the Most High's wings, in this same fashion, completely trusting him in all things, and having sin cleansed from our lives, then we will see this kind of protection. And so the promise is, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. In all your ways. Again, why do Christians, why do believers, why do Messianics not see this kind of full protection from the Almighty? I would suggest to you that the Father's not a liar. That it's because we have not come under the complete protection and dwelling place of the Almighty. And so he's not guarding us in all of our ways. They, the angels, will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. This is what we can expect when we make the Most High our dwelling. You will tread upon the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent. These are all pictures of what it's going to be like in the Messianic age, where a child will reach his hand into the cobra, the snake's pit, and it will not be harmed. But we can have this kind of protection from the Most High now when we're fully committed to the Almighty. And so my next slide is about being all in. When you make the Most High your dwelling, even Yahweh, who is my refuge, then no harm will befall you, no disaster will come near your tent. This promise is for those who are all in, are fully committed to the Almighty, not to those who are just testing or experimenting and trying it out. People that want to try out. I know that people like to come to Passover Seders to try it out, just to see what it was like back in the day of our ancestors, where Yahweh delivered them out of Egypt. My advice, my counsel is that we don't just try out and put it to the test and see what it was like some people do who want to come to a Passover Seder or come to a gathering. I mean, it's okay to visit a congregation or an assembly and see what the people are like. It's almost like they're coming in to put us to the test to see if we're really what we say we are. And that's why it's important that we be fully committed before a lot of people come in and join us. And even I think the Father is preventing a lot of people from coming in to join us because he wants us to be fully in. He wants us to be all in and fully committed to his ways and be the people that he's called us to be. Loving one another, as a sign to the world that we are truly his disciples. And so when we're all in, we will see this protection from the Almighty. And I would suggest that we not be trying out what it's like to walk out our faith, but we need to be all in our faith walk before the Almighty. The Messiah was tested, and this verse was quoted by the Messiah to the enemy. This verse from Psalm 91. It says, Yahushua was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of Elohim, tell these stones to become bread. And Yahushua answered, it is written, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of Elohim. An important foundational principle that we must live by is that it's not about the bread, it's about, and we did these studies, I know, when we were looking at the Pilgrimage Festival of Unleavened Bread and the meaning of unleavened bread. But the lesson was that it's every word that proceeds from the mouth of Elohim is what brings us sustenance and life. And so the Master recited this verse back to the enemy, who was trying to tempt him to do for himself what he didn't need to do for himself, to turn stones into bread. And then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of Elohim, he said, throw yourself down, for it is written, and the enemy quoted Psalm 91, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. The promise is true. And what the enemy was saying was true to a point. But Yahushua answered him, it is also written, do not put Yahweh your Elohim to the test. And so it's not for us to take these verses from Psalm 91, the verses of promise, protection, and put him to the test and put ourselves in a situation where we can find out whether the Almighty is going to protect us. That would be putting Yahweh to the test. And the scriptures tell us not to do that. So we need to find that balance between trusting that Yahweh will command his angels concerning us and then putting him to the test. We don't want to fall into that category where we're putting him to the test, but we know and are confident that when something happens around us that puts us in danger, that Yahweh will command his angels concerning us to protect us from all harm. Hallelujah. And then again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. And Yahushua said to him, away from me, Satan. For it is written, worship Yahweh your Elohim and serve him only. And then the devil left him and the angels came and attended him. The angels came and attended him. And isn't that what Psalm 91 is talking about? It's about the angels. He commands his angels concerning us. And so when the Master didn't take it upon himself to perform miracles for bread and throwing himself down to putting Elohim to the test, the angels came and ministered to him, just as the promise of Psalm 91 alludes to. So the angels came and ministered to him. Hallelujah. And again, these are examples for us that we're not to put our Father to the test, but we're to simply trust him and put ourselves in a place of protection. Yahweh's promise is what brings us to the conclusion of Psalm 91, and that is because he loves me, in some translations. Here I translated it, because he is attached to me in love, says Yahweh. I will rescue him, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. He will call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. So I want to look at this word that is translated love, because he loves me, or as I have translated, because he has attached to me in love. It's not the regular, more common Hebrew word for love, ahav. We know that word ahav. We sing it in songs. We've talked about it many times. It's all over the scriptures. But here there's a particular word that's used. It's the word chashach. And what it means is to be attached to. It can be translated love because that's the connotation. When one person attaches to somebody else, it's typically out of love that we get attached. It's to press together or bind or join together. It's used of loving a woman. And in Genesis 34:8, the word is used. It's not the perfect illustration of the word love, but it really does bring out the meaning of the word love. And it's when Shechem took Israel's daughter, Dinah, and he took her into his tent. Okay? And the brothers were furious with Shechem and with Hamor, the father of Shechem. But Hamor came to Jacob, and the sons were all with Jacob when he said this. He said, "My son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter." It's the Hebrew word chashach here. It literally reads, Shechem has attached his soul with your daughter. It's the love of a man for a woman that wants to be in that intimate place of relationship with the woman. In other words, to be husband and wife. And so he says, please give her to him as his wife. And so this is the word used here in Psalm 91 of the love that we have for the Father. It's being attached in love to him, having that love of a spouse, of having an intimate relationship with the Almighty. Because he has attached to me in love, the Father says, then I will rescue him. You see the importance of this nuance that's brought out here in this word. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. I will answer him, be with him in trouble, deliver him, honor him, satisfy him with long life, and show him my salvation. Yahweh in Deuteronomy 7:7 and 8 says, Yahweh did not set his affection on you, and this is the same word, hashach. He did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. He's talking about Yahweh inviting his people, Israel, into a marriage covenant relationship with him. And so Yahweh set his affection on Israel. But it was because Yahweh loved you, and this is the more common word, ahav. He loved you and kept the oath he swore to your forefathers, that he brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Mitzrayim. And so Yahweh did set his affection on his people, but it was not because they were more numerous than the other peoples. But it was because he had vowed to love his people, and because of the oath he swore with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he set his affection on his people. And then again, this word chashav used in Deuteronomy 10, it says, to Yahweh your Elohim belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth and everything in it. And yet Yahweh set his affection. He set his affection on your forefathers and loved them. And he chose you, their descendants, above all the nations, as it is today. Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer. So this is the response that he expects from his people, upon whom he has set his affection and his love on. He has covenanted covenanted with us as his people in a marriage-style relationship to be intimate with us, to be our Elohim and we his people. And so our natural response of love, as a bride would to her husband, is, and us to Elohim, is to circumcise our hearts. In other words, don't allow stubbornness or pride to get in the way anymore of our relationship with the Almighty. Do not be stiff-necked any longer. We are to submit to him out of complete obedience and love and submission to the Father. And really, this is what all this is alluding to. So because he is attached to me in love, I will rescue him. I will protect him. He will call upon me and I will answer him. These are all the promises of Elohim as Elohim to his people. But these are all the things that he's going to do. He talked about some of those things in Deuteronomy 28. He talked about some of those things in Shemot 19, where he was offering a covenant relationship with his people just before he came down on Sinai, and in several other places in the prophets, he offers this kind of behavior toward his people as Elohim to his people, that he's going to deliver us, he's going to hear us, answer us, honor us, satisfy us, and show his salvation to us. And so my final slide is kind of a summary of the meaning of Psalm 91 and what it means to abide under the shadow of his wings. We're to dwell in the shelter of the Almighty. We're to rest in the shadow of the Almighty and make Elyon, or the Most High Elohim, our refuge and our fortress. We're to trust in him. We're to be attached to him in love and set our affection on him, and we're to acknowledge his name. And when all of these conditions are met, these conditions are really parallel in thought, and I don't want to make this out to be a list that we have to go down and check off each one. But in fact, if we are in that intimate relationship with the Almighty, we will be able to check off each one for our own lives. We will be dwelling in his shelter, seeking, as David did, the presence of Yahweh. And he said, this was the only thing I asked, that I might dwell in the shelter of the Most High. David wanted to be in that place of safety, that place of intimacy with the Most High, and in that place where he would be provided protection from his enemies. We rest in his shadow. We make him our refuge and fortress and trust in him. And when we attach to him in love, then he will provide those things, the protection from the pestilence and the arrows that fly by day, and all that he promises to do to his people. But these are the conditions that we must meet. And this is where we have to be in our walk with the Almighty, to expect his angels to be commanded to keep our foot from being dashed against the stone. So hallelujah, I hope that this little excursion into Psalm 91 is helpful. I know a lot of this is kind of on the surface, and a lot of these things we've heard in the past, but I wanted to bring out some of the nuances of the passage and encourage us all to make him our dwelling place, and to seek his face, and to have that intimacy and relationship with him, so that we can enjoy all the benefits that he provides as our Elohim. Hallelujah. What say you? I welcome questions if you have any, comments, testimonies, prophecies. These are all things that are part of our gathering and part of the way that we encourage one another and we exercise our gifts. So please speak. I want to hear from you. You've heard enough from me, rambling and stumbling along today. A little bit tongue-tied today, but sometimes that happens. But hallelujah, bless the Father. His word goes forth and His Word is truth. And we can still glean, in spite of the insufficiencies of the speaker, we can still glean from the power of His Word and what it teaches us about our relationship with Him. Who's got the microphone?